Ned Stark rides through the gates of Winterfell on a gray afternoon, the kind that belongs only to the north, the kind where the sky and the stone seem to share the same color, the same silence. He has been gone for years. He returns with a son that is not his son, and a secret that could kill everyone who knows it. He finds Catelyn in the Great Hall. She is standing near the hearth, their newborn Robb held against her shoulder. She looks at the bundle in Ned's arms, and she does not speak. She waits. That is the thing about Catelyn Tully. She waits until she knows the shape of what she is facing. Ned sets the infant down on the table carefully, and he meets her eyes. "This is not what you think," he says. "Then tell me what it is." He tells her, all of it. He tells her about Lyanna, about the tower, about the promise he made to a dying girl in a bed-soaked red. He tells her the boy's father was Rhaegar Targaryen, and he watches Catelyn's face do the work of absorbing that. The weight of it, the impossible, dangerous weight of it. She says nothing for a long moment. The fire pops. Robb stirs against her shoulder. "Robert cannot know," she says finally. "No. And if he learns it himself, he will kill the child." "Yes." She looks down at the infant on the table. He is sleeping. He does not know what he is, or what he costs, or what he has already survived. His small chest rises and falls with a patience that seems almost deliberate. "You should have told no one," she says. "I am telling you." That distinction matters to her. She turns it over. He did not tell a Maester, did not confide in a loyal bannerman, did not carry it alone like a lord managing an inconvenient asset. He told his wife. She does not say what that means to her, but she hears it. What follows is not warmth, not immediately. What follows is a long northern night, the kind where the cold comes in through the stones no matter how well they are banked. And Catelyn sits in the room where they have placed the infant, and she thinks with the careful, methodical mind she was raised to use. She is a daughter of River Run. She understands that decisions made in feeling tend to break, and decisions made in calculation tend to hold. So she calculates. The boy is a threat if he is known. The boy is a ward, a secret, a life that was handed to her husband by a dead sister's last wish. He is also, and she makes herself look at this directly because she is not a woman who flinches from what is true, innocent. He has done nothing. He does not know the war that made him. He does not know that his father's name is the reason half of Westeros burned. She picks him up before the night is done. He is lighter than Robb. He opens his eyes, dark and unfocused, and she looks at him the way one looks at a thing one is deciding about. She decides not to love him, not yet, perhaps not ever in the same way. But to be fair, to be deliberate, to refuse the cruelty that would come naturally, that would be easy, that the world would not even blame her for. She will not make him sleep in the cold quarters. She will not seat him at the far end of the table. She will not let the servants speak of him in lowered voices, while the Stark children absorb those whispers like cold water into cloth. She tells Ned the next morning. He eats with us. He sleeps in the warmth. He is a ward of this house, and he will be treated as one. Ned looks at her for a long moment. Something in him eases. "Cat, do not mistake this for forgiveness," she says. "I am doing what the boy requires, not what you deserve." He nods. He understands the difference. He has always understood her. And so Jon Snow, for that is the name he is given, a plain name, a northern name, a name that says nothing and asks nothing, is brought into Winterfell, not as a shameful thing kept in shadow, but as a child with a place at the table. He is not told his story. None of the children are. Robb and Sansa and the ones who come after grow up beside him, and they know him as Jon, as a familiar presence, as someone who belongs in the warmth of the Great Hall, the same as any of them. It is a small act. It takes no armies, no ravens, no political maneuvering. It is one woman choosing, in the dark of a northern night, how a child will be treated. But small acts in Westeros have long shadows, and this one stretches farther than Catelyn could have calculated. Because the boy who grows up warm and wanted inside the walls of Winterfell is not the same boy who grows up cold and apart. And the man he becomes because of that warmth will one day stand at a crossroads that the other version of him never would have reached, facing a choice that the lonely, distant Jon could never have made. And as the seasons turn and the children of Winterfell grow taller and louder in the halls, as the direwolves are still years away and Robert Baratheon still sits his iron throne without knowing what sleeps beneath his oldest friend's roof, Jon Snow is learning to walk across the stones of the Great Hall, chasing after Robb with a determination that makes the nursemaids laugh, reaching for a hand that is offered to him without hesitation, without the small cruelties of withheld warmth. And it is in this reaching, in this ordinary moment of a child crossing a floor toward another child, that the entire shape of what is coming begins, quietly, to change, not with a declaration or a revelation or any moment that history would mark, but with the simple fact of a hand extended and not pulled away. And somewhere in the deeper north, the wall stands as it always has, and the cold beyond it is patient in the way that only ancient things can be patient, and it does not yet know the name of the boy who will one day matter to its survival. But the boy is here. He is warm. He is growing, and Catelyn Stark watches him from the doorway of the Great Hall on a morning when the gray light comes flat through the high windows, and she does not look away, which is itself a kind of answer to a question she has not yet allowed herself to ask aloud. The years move the way years do in the north, slowly, with weight, each season pressing down a little harder than the one before it. Robb grows tall and loud and certain of himself in the way that heirs tend to become certain, carrying the tully copper in his hair and the stark gray in his eyes. And Jon grows alongside him, slightly quieter, slightly more watchful, but never behind. Not in the yard, not in the lessons, not in the small competitions that boys invent for themselves, racing the length of the corridor near the armory, or seeing who can hold a sword form the longest before Ser Roderick calls them in for correction. Jon holds it longer. He does not celebrate this. He simply notes it, files it somewhere behind those dark eyes, and moves to the next thing. Catelyn watches from the balcony above the training yard on a morning when the frost has not yet lifted from the stones, her breath rising in small clouds, her hands folded at the rail. Below her, Robb takes a blow to the shoulder from a padded sword and staggers. Jon catches him by the arm before he falls. It is instinct, no calculation in it. Robb laughs and shoves him, and they reset their stances, and Catelyn finds that her chest is doing something she did not instruct it to do. It is softening. Not all the way, not without remainder, but softening nonetheless, in the particular way that evidence softens resistance, not with warmth, but with the slow, reluctant admission that a thing is true. He carries none of Ned's wrongs. This is what she has come to understand, standing at this railing, watching this boy. Whatever Ned did, wherever this child came from, the wrong is Ned's. The boy is only the boy. She has always known this in the rational sense. It is only now beginning to reach her in the other sense, the one that governs the body's responses without asking permission. She does not tell Ned what she has observed. Not yet. She has other work to do first. Maester Lewin receives her note on a Tuesday, folded twice, sealed with no wax. The note is brief. It asks in the careful language of an inquiry that is not quite an admission what the precise legal distinction is between a ward and a bastard in the eyes of Westerosi custom, specifically regarding inheritance, social standing, and the forms of address that would be appropriate in a great lord's household. Lewin reads it once, reads it again, and sets it down on his work table beside a half-finished letter about grain stores. He sits for a long moment, then he writes back. His reply is thorough. A ward, he explains, is a legal designation of guardianship, recognized by the sept, acknowledged by custom, neither inherited nor stigmatized in the way a bastard name is. A ward takes no name from shame. A ward owes loyalty, but receives protection in a form that bastardry does not guarantee. A ward may not inherit, but neither is a ward excluded from the dignities of a household, from proper training, from acknowledgement at table, from a lord's stated favor. Lewin writes all of this in his careful maester's hand. At the bottom of the letter, he adds, in slightly smaller script, that the distinction is one that a household of good repute might make clearly if it chose to, without requiring any announcement that would invite unwanted scrutiny from the south. He does not ask her why. He does not need to. Catelyn burns neither letter. She keeps them both, folded in the cedar box she keeps beneath the ledge near the east window of her solar, behind the letters from Lisa, behind the household records. She places them there deliberately. A record. A proof of care, if care is ever called into question. Jon does not know any of this, of course. He knows only that Winterfell is his, in the way that belonging is known by children, through texture and repetition, through which flagstone makes the hollow sound near the kitchen passage, through which window in which tower gives the best sight of riders approaching from the King's Road. He knows Robb's silences as well as Robb's laughter. He knows that Sansa will not share her bread at breakfast, but will unpredictably press wildflowers into his hand for no reason she will later admit. He knows that the gray stone of the walls holds cold in summer and heat in winter in equal measure, as if the castle is always trying to remember what it is supposed to feel. He does not feel despised. He has nothing to compare his life to, no ghost of something better to haunt him. And so what he feels instead is gratitude, though he would not name it that, being 7 and then 8 and then 9, with no vocabulary yet for the thing that makes him run a little faster when someone mentions the name of the house he serves. Stark. He says it the way Robb says it, with certainty, with the full weight of a thing that is his. Robb never questions this. It does not occur to him to question it, because Robb has been raised in a house where the question has quietly, deliberately, never been raised. This is Catelyn's work, not the work of love yet. Something more functional, more architectural. She has built a structure around the boy that does not shame him, and a structure, she knows, is sometimes the beginning of something it was not designed to be. She watches them in the yard again on an afternoon when the light is long and yellow, and the shadows of the two boys stretch far across the frozen mud. And Robb says something to Jon that she cannot hear from this distance, And Jon throws his head back and laughs in a way that is entirely unguarded, entirely unperformed, and she thinks, with the particular clarity that comes before the thought is ready to be thought. There will come a day when someone at court asks about the dark-haired boy from Winterfell, asks his name, asks his lineage, asks why he sits at the Lord's table with the look of a son and not the stoop of a shadow. And she will need to have an answer that lands like a wall and not an apology. And she is already watching the boy more carefully than she had watched anything in a long time. And it is the dire wolves that make her understand why. They find them on the King's Road, in the gray morning cold, the pups small and blind, and pressing against a mother already stiffened by the cold. 6 of them. 1 for each of Ned's children, Theon Greyjoy says, with that particular smirk of his that suggests he finds the coincidence amusing rather than significant. And there is a moment, brief, suspended, where Catelyn might have let the silence stretch long enough to become a verdict. She does not. She steps forward before the silence can settle, and she says, clearly enough that every man on the road can hear her, that the wolf found its way to Jon as surely as it found its way to the others, and that the old gods do not make such gestures carelessly. She says it the way Ned would say something final, without flourish, without the need to argue the point after it has been made. Ned looks at her across the space between them. He does not speak. He does not need to. Jon looks at her too, and his expression is one she is still learning to read. Something between surprise and a careful blankness, the face of a child who has learned not to hope too visibly for things. She holds his gaze for a moment, just long enough to let him understand that the permission is real, that it is not provisional, and then she turns back toward Winterfell, as if the matter is entirely unremarkable. The pup Jon carries is white, not pale, not winter gray. White, the way snow is white in the first hour after it falls, before anything has touched it. Its eyes, when they open days later, are red as embers at the heart of a cooling fire. Ghost, Jon names it quietly, without ceremony, and the name suits the creature in a way that makes Catelyn's chest tighten with something she cannot immediately name. She watches Ghost move through the castle in the days that follow, silent, unlike the other pups, who crash through the great hall and slide on the stone floors, with the reckless enthusiasm of young things discovering the world. Ghost moves without sound. Ghost appears at the edges of rooms and sits very still, and his red eyes catch firelight in a way that is almost deliberate. He watches. He waits. He reminds her of something she has been trying not to think about. Ned told her the truth about Jon's mother on a night when the candles were low and the children were long asleep, and she has carried that truth the way one carries a stone in a closed fist, aware of it always, unable to set it down, unable entirely to examine it. Targaryen blood. The word moves through her mind as she watches the white wolf curl beside Jon's feet, and she knows, with the cold certainty of a woman who has spent years thinking past what she is supposed to think, that albino creatures in Westerosi lore have always belonged to bloodlines that burned a little differently than ordinary men. She does not say this to anyone, not then. That evening, she comes to Ned in his solar when the fire has burned low and the shutters are rattling with the first real breath of autumn wind. He is standing at the window with the look he sometimes wears, a look that is half duty and half grief, as though he is measuring the distance between what is and what should have been. "The wolf troubles me," she says. She does not sit. She stands near the fire with her arms folded, her voice level and dry. Not the keeping of it. I meant what I said on the road. But the look of it, Ned. The color. He turns from the window slowly, and she watches him understand what she's not saying. He looks stark enough, Ned says carefully. He does, she agrees. Today, in Winterfell, with Robb beside him. She pauses, letting the implication arrange itself. There will come a day when he is not standing beside Robb, when someone looks at him in a different light, in a different room, and begins to ask the kinds of questions you and I have never wanted anyone to ask. Ned's jaw tightens. What are you asking of me, Cat? I am asking you to begin teaching him the history of the Targaryens, she says simply. Their lineage, their wars, their traits, not as a lesson, not as something pointed or frightening, but as the history of the realm. A Lord's son should know it. Robb should know it too, so there is nothing particular in the asking. She watches Ned's face, reading the precise weight of his reluctance. He does not need to know why the lesson matters. Not yet. But when the day comes that he does need to know, the ground should already be prepared, and we should not be the ones scrambling to explain what we should have understood years before that we were always going to have to say. She meets his eyes, holds them. This secret of ours is not a lie we tell, Ned. It is a wound, and wounds that are never tended do not close. They wait. The fire settles in the grate. Outside, the wind finds a gap in the shutters and moves through the solar like a whisper that cannot quite form itself into words. Ned crosses the room and sits heavily in the chair at his desk, and he is quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that is not reluctance so much as a man calculating the full distance of a road he has already committed to walking. And when he finally speaks, he says only that he will begin with the dance of the dragons, since it is a chapter of history that requires no personal explanation, no confession, no moment where a father must meet his son's eyes and decide how much of the truth is mercy, and how much of it is simply the thing that must eventually be said. And Catelyn is already thinking past the dance, already measuring the chapters that come after, already considering at what age a boy can hear the name Rhaegar Targaryen without the name meaning anything in particular, and at what age it will begin to mean everything, and whether those two ages are far enough apart that what grows between them might be strong enough to bear the weight of what comes next. Because the weight, she knows, is not small, but that is a calculation for another night. And tonight the wind is cold, and the sound of hooves has been expected for 3 days now. They come on the 4th morning. The outriders appear first, cresting the rise south of Winterfell, while the sky is still pale and undecided about the day. Catelyn hears the horns from her chamber and moves with a deliberateness that has nothing frantic about it. Though her mind is already several steps ahead of her hands, she dresses without rushing. She goes to Jon's room herself. He is already awake, sitting on the edge of his bed with his boots in his lap, and the fact that he does not look surprised to see her there tells her something about how carefully the boy listens to the sounds of the castle around him. She looks at him for a moment. The gray eyes, the stark jaw, the way he holds himself. Still composed, a boy who has spent years learning not to take up more space than he is certain he is permitted. Come, she says simply. You will stand with the others. He does not ask what she means. He does not finish lacing his boots before he is on his feet. She had chosen his clothes the evening prior without ceremony, without explanation. A fine wool tunic in dark gray, well cut, the kind of garment that says house without announcing ambition. Not so rich as to invite questions, not so plain as to invite pity. The calculation is precise, and Catelyn is nothing if not precise when precision is the instrument required. In the courtyard, Robb and Sansa and Arya are already arranged near Ned, and Bran is positioned close to his father's side in that way small children have of anchoring themselves to certainty. Catelyn brings Jon to stand beside Robb, and if Ned sees it, he says nothing. He does not need to. This was agreed without ever being formally agreed, which is the way many things in the Stark household have come to function since the night Catelyn sat beside the fire and decided that tending a wound was not the same as pretending the wound was never made. Robert Baratheon arrives the way Robert Baratheon does everything, loudly, largely, with a warmth that fills space the way a fire fills a room, welcome for the heat even when the smoke is considerable. He is broader than the stories. Ned's face opens in a way Catelyn rarely sees, something genuine and unguarded moving through his features as the king swings down from his horse and embraces him. And for a moment, the two men are simply two men who have not seen each other in years, and the politics of it recede behind something human. Then Robert pulls back and turns his eyes down the line of children, and Catelyn watches him the way she watches everything, thoroughly, from a composed expression. "God's Ned," Robert says, moving along the line with the easy pleasure of a man who likes children in the abstract. "They grow quick, don't they?" He ruffles Bran's hair. He looks at Sansa with the uncomplicated approval of a man who knows beauty when he sees it and considers it a pleasant fact rather than a complicated one. He claps Robb on the shoulder, then he reaches Jon, and Catelyn's spine is a straight line, and her face is a held thing. "And this one?" Robert asks. "A ward of the house," Ned says, even and unhurried. "Jon, he has been with us since his first year." Robert looks at the boy for a moment with the cursory interest of a man cataloging rather than scrutinizing. "Good face," he says, which is the entirety of the analysis, and then he is already moving toward the warmth of the great hall, his voice rising again to fill the space around him, and the moment passes the way the clouds pass, without ceremony, without consequence, dissolving into weather. Cersei Lannister does not dissolve. She dismounts with the controlled grace of a woman who has spent her life conducting herself as though observed, and she is observed, and she observes in return. Her eyes move across the courtyard, the way a hand moves across a map, measuring, noting, returning to certain points of interest. She looks at Catelyn. She looks at the gray-eyed boy beside Robb Stark. She looks at Catelyn again. She says nothing. She smiles the particular smile she uses when filing something away, and she falls into step behind her husband, and that is all. It is enough. Catelyn meets the queen's gaze for the half second it lingers, and neither woman blinks, and then it is over, and the yard fills with noise. What Cersei makes of that observation, she keeps behind her teeth for now. But Cersei Lannister does not notice things without eventually using them, and that half second will earn interest in the quiet of her own council before the royal party has been at Winterfell a full day. For the moment, the yard is loud, and the afternoon is full of the particular theater that follows a king. The household moves around the royal party the way water moves around stone, accommodating, constant, shaped by proximity. Jon moves with the Stark boys through the afternoon's informal business, and at some point, before the sun begins to lower, someone suggests the yard. Joffrey is 15 and carries himself with the blunt confidence of a boy who has never been made to feel uncertain. He watches the Northern boys train with an expression caught somewhere between boredom and the particular hunger that boys with unearned confidence carry toward any arena where they might demonstrate it. He calls out to Jon specifically, not Robb, with the instinct that boys like Joffrey have for identifying the one whose position requires the most proving. "Let us see if Northern bastards fight as plainly as they dress," Joffrey says, with a smile that is not warm. Jon does not rise to it. He picks up the practice sword with the unhurried motion of someone who has been holding a sword since he was old enough to be trusted with the weight of one, and the yard goes quiet in the small way that yards go quiet when something is about to be genuinely interesting. He is good. He is better than good. He moves with an economy that Ser Roderick has spent years building into him. No flourish, no waste, every step deliberate and grounded, and when he disarms the prince's companion, a boy from the Crownlands, competent but not exceptional, the disarmament is clean enough that for a moment, even Joffrey forgets to look composed. Again, Joffrey says, and the word is not quite what it was before. Jon wins the second bout too. And in the small silence that follows, one of the knights from the royal escort, a broad-shouldered man with the comfortable posture of someone who assesses fighting the way craftsmen assess work, says, simply and without performance, that the boy has good hands, real hands, the kind that come from years of honest practice. It is not a grand thing. It is a small thing. It is the first time in Jon's life that someone from beyond the borders of everything he has ever known has looked at him and seen something worth noting, and the sensation in his chest is not pride exactly. Not yet. It is more like the moment before pride, the quiet opening of a space that has always been kept carefully shut, and the air that moves into it is unfamiliar and not entirely comfortable. But it is real, and it is his, and he stands in the practice yard with the late sun angling low across the stones of Winterfell, and allows himself, for just a moment, not to disappear. Catelyn watches from the gallery above the yard. Her hands are folded in front of her. Her face does not change, but she watches him stand there in that light, and she thinks of the calculation she was making the night before, about ages and names and weight. And she thinks that perhaps the structure being built is stronger already than she had dared to measure, though the test of any structure is never the building of it, never the careful laying of stone upon stone, but rather the moment when something falls against it without warning, the moment when a name arrives in a room like a change in weather, and the boy inside the room must already know, without flinching, exactly who he is and what he is, and how far that foundation will hold. And she does not yet know, watching him stand in the last of the afternoon light, that the first real test of that foundation is already moving toward Winterfell from the north, wearing Benjen Stark's familiar face and carrying in his chest the honest conviction that Jon Snow deserves the wall. Benjen Stark is not a cruel man. That is the first thing to understand. When he speaks to Ned in the Solar and puts forward the idea plainly, the boy has talent. The Watch would have him gladly. The wall would make a man of him. He means every word. He speaks without malice. He speaks, in fact, with something very close to affection. The Night's Watch is his world, the only world he has left. and he offers it the way a man offers his best thing to someone he loves. That is what makes Catelyn's argument the harder one to make. She waits until Benjen is gone. She does not rush it. She finds Ned alone in the solar that evening, the candles burning low, the cold pressing at the window glass, and she comes to the door and says quietly that she would speak with him before they sleep. Ned looks up at her face and puts down the letter he is holding. "About Jon," she says. He does not deny it. He waits. "He is 15 years old," she says. He learns quickly. He holds himself well now, better than he did a year ago. "You have seen it. Robb has seen it." She crosses the room and stands near the fire, not for warmth, but because the light makes it easier to speak plainly. The wall takes what it takes and uses it, and that is the end of it. There is no path back. Whatever he might have become, whatever he might have built or led or stood for, all of it ends at the wall. It becomes the walls, and the North loses it. Ned says, "You have changed your tune." "I have changed my understanding," she replies. The distinction matters. She does not pretend otherwise. The North will need every strength it has in the years ahead. That is not sentiment. That is a practical accounting. She does not say Lyanna's name. She does not need to. The name lives in the room between them like a third candle, casting its own particular light. And Ned sits with it for a long moment, his hands flat on the table. And when he finally speaks, his voice is careful and low. "What would you have instead?" he asks. The answer has already been formed. It was formed the night before, in the hour before sleep, when she lay still in the dark and moved pieces across a board that existed only in her mind. "Let him go as an observer," she says. "Let him ride north with Benjen and spend time within the shadow of the wall. Let him learn what it is, what the men who hold it are, what the cold beyond it means. Let him carry that knowledge home, but let him come home." Ned is quiet for a long time. Then he says, "Benjen will not like it." "Benjen will understand it," Catelyn says. "He is a Stark. He will understand the word duty as easily as he breathes." And Ned accepts it. Not immediately, not without the long silence that his nature demands, but he accepts it. And the quiet relief in his face when he does is not something Catelyn had expected to feel anything about. And yet she does. The arrangement is made. Jon rides north with Benjen in the gray of early autumn, and the wall receives him not as a recruit, but as a young man of the North come to learn its weight. He spends 6 weeks in the shadow of Castle Black, watches the men drill and suffer and endure, eats the same gray food, sleeps in the same cold stone, and rides once with a ranging party as far as the edge of their permitted distance before turning back. He doesn't take the black. He doesn't swear the words. He watches. He carries it all inward, the way he has learned to carry most things, quietly and without spilling. He returns to Winterfell with something different in his face. Not hardened exactly, deepened. There is a distance in his eyes that was not there before, the particular distance that belongs to a man who has stood close enough to a hard thing to understand it, and then been permitted to step back. It is Catelyn who notices it first at supper, 3 nights after his return. She watches him across the long table, the candles between them, and he is quieter than usual even for him, turning something over in his mind that he has not yet decided to speak aloud. Later, when the meal is nearly done and the others have drifted into their own conversations, Jon says to her, without looking up from his cup, "You argued against it, against the wall, didn't you? It is not quite a question. Catelyn says, yes. He's quiet for a moment. I know what it is now, he says. What I would have walked into? He turns the cup in his hands. The firelight catches the edge of it. I understand what you kept me from. It is the first time he acknowledged her care aloud. Not her tolerance, not her compromise, but something more direct than either of those things. A naming of what has passed between them, careful and real, the way a stone is real when you press your hand flat against it. She does not know what to say. She does not rush to fill the silence. He looks up at her then, briefly, the way he sometimes looks at Ned, measuring but without armor. And she thinks that the structure she has been building, stone by careful stone, has just been tested for the first time from the inside. Tested not by crisis or collision, but by something quieter and in some ways harder. The simple, honest weight of a young man who has been somewhere cold and come back wanting to know whether the warmth he left behind was something he had imagined or something real. And she gives him his answer, not in words, but in the way she does not look away, in the way her hands stay still in her lap, in the quiet steadiness of her presence across the fire from him, which is its own kind of answer, complete and without condition. It is 3 days later that Ned tells her he is going south. He does not announce it. He never announces things the way lesser men do, with theater and gravity arranged for effect. He comes to her in the solar after the evening meal, when the children are settled and the castle has gone quiet, and he sits down across from her the way he sat across from her 100 times before, and he says it plainly. The king has asked. He cannot refuse. She already knows this. She has known it since the raven came. How long? She says. I cannot say. He pauses. It may be longer than either of us would choose. She does not ask him to refuse. She knows his honor better than she knows her own heart in some moments, and she knows that to ask would be to ask him to be someone other than the man she married. She does not ask, but she watches his face, and she sees that he is not at ease with this. Ned Stark does not want to go south. The South has never wanted him. Not really, and some part of him has always known it. What he gives her instead of reassurance is something more durable. He crosses to the table and takes from beneath the ledger a sealed letter. The wax is dark. He holds it for a moment before he sets it in front of her. This is not to be opened unless I do not return, he says. She looks at the letter, then she looks at him. Jon, she says, it is not a question. Everything, he says, all of it. Names, dates, what I witnessed, what was asked of me and why. He stops. If something happens to me, it should not die with me. She picks up the letter carefully, the way you pick up something that cannot be put back together if dropped. The seal is unbroken. She does not break it. She wraps it in cloth and places it in the cedar chest beside the window, beneath the lock that only she carries the key to. She does not speak while she does this. Neither does he. The silence between them is not uncomfortable. It is the silence of people who have learned to trust each other with the things that cannot be said aloud. That night she lies awake long after Ned is sleeping, and she thinks about the weight of what sits in that chest. Not just the letter, the knowing, the burden of information held in trust, waiting to be used or waiting to be buried, depending on what the South decides to do with her husband. She has held difficult things before. She is a Tully. She knows what it means to carry the shape of something without being able to speak its name. In the days that follow his departure, Winterfell settles into a different rhythm. Robb steps into his responsibilities with the seriousness of a boy who has watched his father closely and understands that seriousness is required of him now. Bran follows Robb everywhere, asking questions Robb sometimes cannot answer. Sansa writes letters south. Arya disappears into the yard with practice swords and comes back bruised and satisfied. Rickon is small still and does not entirely understand what going south means, only that his father is not at the table, and Jon trains. Jon rises early and works hard and speaks carefully and conducts himself in every way that Catelyn has come to recognize as his particular form of honor, a thing inherited so completely from Ned that sometimes it catches her mid-breath. He does not press her. He does not ask for anything she has not already given. But she watches him, watching the horizon, and she recognizes the look. It is the look of someone calculating distance. One evening near the end of the first fortnight, Jon finds her on the wall, walk above the main gate, looking south toward the King's Road. He does not announce himself. He simply comes to stand beside her at the parapet, and for a while they look in the same direction without speaking. "Could I go?" he says at last, not pleading, not demanding, measuring. She turns to look at him. "To court?" "Aye." She considers lying. She decides against it. "The South is not ready for you," she says. "Not yet. Perhaps not for some time." He absorbs this without flinching. There is something in the way he takes it that tells her he already suspected as much, that the question was less a request and more a need to hear the truth spoken plainly. He nods once. Then he looks back toward the road, and Catelyn looks with him, and neither of them says what the other is already thinking, that the South is moving toward something, that whatever Ned has walked into is already in motion, that the quiet of Winterfell feels less like peace now and more like the held breath before a door is opened. And somewhere in the darkness beyond that door, the sealed letter in the cedar chest is already beginning to matter in ways that cannot yet be named, the weight of it pressing against the future like stone against stone, patient and inevitable. The letter arrives before the ravens stop coming. That is the thing about terrible news. It does not travel alone. It brings companions. A rider from the neck, mud-dark and hollow-eyed, dismounts in the yard before Catelyn has finished reading the first dispatch, and by the time she has read 3, she understands that Ned is not imprisoned. Ned is dead. She sits with this for a long time. The candle on her writing table burns without wavering. The cedar chest sits in the corner of her chambers, where it has always sat, and Catelyn looks at it the way one looks at a door one has been told never to open. Then she rises, crosses the room, lifts the lid, and takes out the sealed letter with both hands. She breaks the seal herself. She reads it, standing. She reads it twice, then sets it face down on the table and presses her palm flat against the back of it, as though to hold the words in place, to keep them from rising. The truth of Jon's blood does not surprise her now. What surprises her is how it has changed. The secret that Ned carried south like a shield has been left here, with her, and it is no longer only a burden to protect. It is a fact with edges. It can cut, or it can hold something together, and which of those it becomes depends entirely on what she does next. She does not summon Robb immediately. She sits first. She lets the candle burn lower. When she finally goes to him, the castle is quiet. the hour late enough that the corridors are empty. Robb is in the solar, standing over the table where the maps are spread, and he looks up when she enters with the expression of a young man who has already been preparing himself for whatever she has come to say. "Sit down," she says. He does. She does not soften it. There is no soft way to say it, and Robb deserves the truth without wrapping. She tells him about the letter. She tells him what Ned confided there, about Lyanna, about Rhaegar, about the Tower of Joy, and what was found inside it. She tells him that Jon Snow is not his bastard half-brother, but his cousin, and that the blood in Jon's veins is as royal as any blood left living in the Seven Kingdoms. Robb is quiet for a long time after. His eyes are wide, not with shock exactly, but with the particular grief of understanding something that reorders everything behind it. Every memory rearranged, every assumption quietly revised. He looks at his hands on the table, then back at her. "He doesn't know," Robb says. "No. Are you going to tell him?" Catelyn considers the question with the weight it deserves. "Not yet," she says. "Not until we understand what it would cost him." Robb absorbs this the way he has begun to absorb difficult things, not by resisting them, but by becoming steadier around them, as though the truth is a weight he is redistributing across his shoulders rather than setting down. He asks 2 more questions. Both are practical. Both are the questions a lord asks, not a son, and Catelyn notes this without speaking it. "He fights with us," Robb says finally. Not a question. "He fights with us," she confirms. The bannermen begin arriving the following morning, their horses loud in the yard, their voices louder in the great hall. Catelyn watches them from the gallery above before descending. The Umbers, the Karstarks, the Manderleys, men who have bent the knee to Starks for generations, and who have arrived not to mourn, but to be pointed at something. There is a particular kind of anger in the north that does not weep. It marches. Jon is already in the hall when Catelyn enters. He is standing near the far wall, positioned as he has always positioned himself in rooms like this. Present, but not presuming, visible, but not forward. She crosses the hall toward him. Several heads turn. She does not look at them. She comes to stand beside him, and in doing so, she makes a statement without speaking a word. The lords watch her. She lets them. When Lord Umber's voice rises to ask it, bluntly, because Umbers are always blunt, what place the Snow Boy has among the council, Catelyn turns to face the hall. She does not raise her voice. She does not need to. He is of Stark blood in all the ways that matter, she says. He will stand with the North as it has always stood, with its own. The silence that follows is not the silence of rejection. It is the silence of men recalculating. Some of them have known Jon for years, had seen him train, have watched him at Robb's side across 10 years of boyhood and cold mornings, and the kind of loyalty that cannot be manufactured. A few nod slowly. Great Jon Umber says nothing, which from him is something close to approval, and the hall breathes again, and Jon Snow, standing at the far edge of it all, understands that something has shifted beneath him like tectonic stone. He rides south 3 days later, not at the rear of the column, not folded quietly among the outriders where a bastard might be tucked away out of sight. He rides near the front, close behind Robb, close enough that the bannermen can see him. Grey Wind paces ahead of them in that uncanny way of direwolves, reading the road before any scout can, and Jon's own horse, a dark roan he has ridden since his second year at Winterfell, keeps easy pace beside Robb's gray. They do not speak much in those early miles. They do not need to. The army behind them stretches for a mile and more, the creak and clatter of it filling the cold morning air, and the weight of what has begun settles over both of them like the first snowfall of a long winter. Catelyn does not ride with the host. She takes a smaller party west toward the Stormlands, carrying with her the beginnings of something that has no name yet. Her goal is Renly first. His numbers are too large to ignore. And then Stannis, who holds fewer swords, but whose legitimacy cuts sharper. It is with Stannis that she carries the true edge. In the privacy of whatever meeting room she secures, she will let him understand carefully, in the way careful women speak to careful men, that the question of succession need not end with Joffrey's removal, that there are bloodlines not yet accounted for, that she knows things which, if verified and properly channeled, could alter the shape of every claim on that wretched throne. She does not say Jon's name. She does not need to say it. Stannis is not a man who misses implications when they are drawn with sufficient precision, and Catelyn Tully has spent 20 years learning how to draw lines that cannot be walked back. The army crosses the neck without incident and drives south through the Riverlands, where the land is already scarred by Lannister outriders burning what they cannot hold. It is here, on the third engagement of the campaign, that the thing happens which changes how the men look at Jon Snow. The Lannister position is on a low ridge above a shallow river crossing. The crossing is obvious. Too obvious. Robb's commanders read it as a defensive choice, a matter of holding the ford to extract terms. They begin to discuss the most direct approach, the force required, the time of day best suited for crossing under arrow fire. Jon listens. He studies the ridge from a rise half a mile distant, one hand resting loose on his saddle, eyes moving slowly across the terrain the way he learned to read terrain at Castle Black, where the difference between a drift and a hiding place can mean 30 dead brothers. He sees the tree line to the east. He sees where it thickens. He sees that there are no birds rising from it. They want us at the crossing, he says, not loudly, not forcefully. The ridge is a curtain. The real weight is in those trees to the east. Galbart Glover turns to look at him. Robb does not turn immediately. He keeps his eyes on the ridge, and something moves behind them. The recalculation Catelyn had trusted him capable of. You think they plan to let us commit to the ford and then hit our flank, Robb says. I think the ford is bait, Jon says. The men on the ridge are meant to hold our eyes. The silence that follows is the kind that precedes either dismissal or decision. Robb turns his horse east and rides a quarter mile to look at the tree line for himself. Gray wind goes with him, and when the dire wolf pauses and lowers his head and does not move forward, Robb comes back and says nothing for a moment. Then he begins to give orders. The feint is countered. The Lannister cavalry in the tree line, perhaps 2,000 horse, positioned to collapse on a Stark flank, already committed and disordered at the ford, finds instead a prepared reception. 2,000 northern spears, and Robb Stark himself at the point of the counter, reading the ground the way Jon had read it, hitting the cavalry before it can fully deploy. The engagement is brief and decisive. The ridge falls without the flanking action to support it, and by early afternoon, the Lannister force has broken and scattered northward, and the ford belongs to the Starks. It is in the aftermath, when the men are still breathing hard, and the mud is churned and gray, and the river runs faintly red near the western bank, that Robb reins in among his commanders and calls Jon's name, calls it clearly so the men nearby can hear it. Jon saw it before any of us did, Robb says. His voice carries. He means it to. Remember that. The cheer begins near the front of the column and moves back through it like a wave through deep water. Jon's name rising in the cold Riverland's air. Soldiers who do not know him, passing it back to soldiers who do. And it builds until it is something Jon has never felt before. Not whispered, not hedged, not qualified by the word that has followed him since birth, but simply his name, spoken aloud by men who have chosen to follow his brother and are now, in some portion of themselves, choosing to follow him too. And it is that thought, still unfinished and unexamined, that carries Jon through the cold ride back to camp, through the dressing of a shallow cut along his forearm, through the evening meal eaten beside men who clap him on the shoulder without ceremony or condition, and it is still turning in him, slow and wordless, when the raven arrives. Varys does not travel with armies. He does not like mud or cold or the smell of horses. He prefers stone corridors and candlelight, and the particular silence of rooms where powerful men believe themselves to be alone. But his birds travel everywhere, and his little birds, those quiet, unremarkable people who pour wine and carry bundles and tend to horses at waystation inns, are everywhere that his birds are not. He has been gathering fragments for years. A midwife outside Starfall who accepted coin and said nothing for a decade before seeing something small to someone small. A septon near the Tower of Joy who copied a record that should not have been copied. A Dornish trader whose memory was long and whose silence had a price. None of these fragments meant anything alone. Together in the right hands, arranged in the right order across a long table in a low-lit room, they mean a great deal. Tyrion sits very still when Varys tells him. That itself is notable. Tyrion is rarely still. He holds his cup without drinking from it, and his mismatched eyes move across the wall opposite, as though reading something written there that no one else can see. A legitimate claim, Tyrion says finally. Not a question. If the marriage was real, Varys says, and the evidence suggests it was, then yes, prior to your sisters, prior to your nephews, prior to nearly everything your family has built. Tyrion sets the cup down. And he is in the north, with the Starks. He almost smiles. Of course he is. What a living Targaryen heir aligned with Winterfell would mean for the Lannisters requires no lengthy calculation. It means the war they are already losing becomes a war with a dynastic dimension they cannot simply kill their way out of. It means every lord who has bent the knee under duress has a new reason to unbend it. Tyrion turns this over quietly, the way a man turns a stone in his hand, feeling its weight, assessing whether it is a tool or a weapon, or simply something that will fall on him. Across the narrow sea, the same information moves through different hands and arrives in a different room entirely. A Lysene merchant, careful and well compensated, delivers a letter to a member of Daenerys Targaryen's household in Meereen, or wherever she sits now, managing dragons and cities and the endless complicated weight of a cause she has carried since childhood. She reads it once, she reads it again. She sets it flat on the table and does not speak for a long time. She has believed herself the last dragon, not as a vanity, as a fact, plain and structural, the foundation on which everything else is built. The last of a blood, the last of a name, the sole inheritor of a dynasty that the world burned down. And now there's a name and a letter, a nephew she has never met, born of a union she was never told of, raised in the north under a name that is not his own. The fury comes first, quick and bright, then something that resembles grief, though she could not easily say who or what she is grieving for. Then, slower and more careful than either of those things, a hunger to understand, to see, to know whether this is real and what it means and what he is. Her certainty does not shatter, it cracks. There is a difference. A shattered thing is finished. A cracked thing holds its shape, but admits the cold. The raven that reaches the Stark war camp comes through Littlefinger's network, which means it is wrapped in enough indirection to seem innocuous to anyone who intercepts it, and encoded in a cipher that Catelyn learned from her father's muster when she was 12 years old and has never had cause to use until now. Petter expects gratitude. He always expects gratitude. She reads the message twice in the thin light of her tent, and what she feels is not gratitude, but a cold, settling clarity. The kind that comes not from relief, but from the recognition that something that has been approaching for a very long time has finally arrived. She gathers them in the great hall of the castle they are using as a temporary command. A modest riverland's seat, stone-floored, banners removed, smelling of tallow and wet wool. Robb, Arya, who has been allowed to stay close to camp, and Jon. She stands at the head of the long table, and she does not soften it, because she has learned that softening hard things only delays the weight of them. "Jon," she says, "what I am about to tell you is true. I have known parts of it for years. I should have told you sooner, and I did not. And that is a failure I will not explain away." She holds his gaze. "Your father was not Eddard Stark." The word that follows hangs in the cold air of that stone room, falling into silence the way a stone falls into deep water. The name Targaryen sinking past all of them, past Robb, who goes very still, past Arya, whose mouth opens slightly, past Jon himself, who does not look away from Catelyn's face, as though if he keeps looking at her, the word will remain manageable, will remain something she has said, rather than something that is now true. And the water closes over it without a sound, and the ripples are only just beginning to reach the shores of everything Jon has ever known about himself, about the blood in his veins, about the man he has called father in the quiet chambers of his heart, since he was old enough to call anyone anything at all. He does not speak for a long time. None of them do. The tallow candles burn without drama, indifferent to the thing that has just been set loose in the room. And Ghost, who has been lying near the door with his great red eyes half closed, lifts his head slightly, as though he can smell the shift in the air. When Jon does speak, his voice is quiet and entirely steady. "I am a Stark," he says. Not a question, not a protest, a declaration, the way a man plants a flag in ground he has bled for. Whatever else may be true, I am a Stark. That is what I am. Catelyn holds his gaze. She has rehearsed many versions of this moment across many sleepless nights, and none of them looked quite like this. His composure, the stillness of him, which is so thoroughly Ned's stillness that it nearly undoes her. "Yes," she says. "You are, and you are also something else. Both of those things are true at once. That is not a contradiction, Jon. It is a bridge. One the realm may need more than it has ever needed any army." He looks at her for a long moment before he rises and walks out without another word, and she lets him go, because some truths need air before they can be carried. Robb watches the door after his brother has passed through it. Then he turns back to Catelyn. His face is the face of a man calculating something enormous. "The Northern Lords," he says quietly. "I know," she says. They debate through the night. She can hear them in the adjoining hall, their voices rising and falling like weather. The older lords uncertain and suspicious, the younger ones divided between ambition and unease. Lord Glover says the Targaryen name is a torch held too close to dry timber. Lord Manderley, pragmatic as always, observes that a legitimate claim, carefully managed, is better leverage than a bastard's honor could ever be. There is no agreement when the candles burn low. There rarely is with lords who reach consensus the way rivers reach the sea, slowly, and only after running into every obstacle available. Jon, meanwhile, walks the walls. Ghost moves beside him through the dark, silent, and vast. His white coat faintly luminous against the black stone. The cold is serious here, the kind that finds the gaps in wool and settles there, and Jon walks without appearing to feel it, his eyes on the horizon where the darkness begins to lighten almost imperceptibly at its farthest edge. He is not brooding, he is thinking, which has always been a different thing for him. Cleaner, more purposeful, arriving eventually at a place he can stand on. By the time the gray light comes, he has found that place. He returns to the hall while the bannermen are still assembling, before the debate can resume its circular course, and he moves to stand beside Robb and Catelyn at the head of the table with a deliberateness that draws all eyes. He speaks before anyone can position themselves around him. "I will carry the name," he says. "I will not deny what I am, but I carry it as a tool for peace, not as a claim. There have been enough claims, enough men who loved their name more than the people beneath their banner. I will not be one of them. If this name can end a war rather than begin one, then it is worth carrying. If it costs more lives than it saves, I will set it down, and I will tell you plainly when I have decided that." The hall is not quiet in the way halls are quiet when men are cowed. It is quiet in the way halls are quiet when men are listening. Lord Glover starts to speak. Jon meets his eyes, and Glover stops. Not because Jon is threatening. There is nothing of threat in him this morning. It is something else, something older and less negotiable than threat. Catelyn watches from where she stands, and she feels it move through her like cold water, the recognition of something she has seen before. He stands with Ned's voice, the unhurried certainty of it, the weight that comes not from volume, but from conviction, the way Ned always made a room feel smaller and steadier at once. But there is something else beneath it, something lighter and more dangerous, a quality that did not come from Winterfell. She thinks of Lyanna as she last heard her described, reckless, brilliant, burning, always moving toward the thing she had decided rather than away from the thing she feared. Both of them are in him, both of them, and the choice Catelyn made beside a cradle in Winterfell, the choice she made when she looked at an infant who had cost her husband everything and decided to let him be hers. That choice is standing at the head of this table, speaking with the voice of two houses and the loyalty of one. And she understands with a clarity that settles rather than startles that this is the moment that choice was always moving toward, had always been moving toward, even in the long years when she could not see the direction it was taking her, or them, or any of it. The peace does not come easily. Nothing in Westeros ever does. But it comes. Jon stands before the assembled lords in the great hall at the Twins, neutral ground, chosen deliberately, because neither Winterfell nor King's Landing carries weight without grievance attached to it. Daenerys sits to his left, her silver hair catching the torchlight, her expression composed in that way she has learned, the stillness of someone who has decided patience is not weakness, but weaponry. The Southern Lords sit opposite. Edmure Tully, older now and careful in his words. Representatives from the Reach and the Stormlands, men who remember what dragonfire looks like and have no appetite for a second lesson. There are no easy smiles in that hall. There are no illusions. But Jon speaks, and the room listens. "I am not here to ask you to forget," he says, and his voice carries to the rafters without effort, without theater. "I am here to ask you to choose what comes after forgetting." Daenerys glances at him. Something in her expression shifts, almost imperceptibly. She does not correct him. She does not need to. The terms they reach are not perfect. They are the terms of men and women who have survived something terrible and understand in the marrow of it that survival is its own argument for compromise. The North retains its independence, formalized in ink and witnessed by ravens sent to every keep from the neck to the wall. Daenerys holds the Iron Throne, but the throne's reach is bounded now, checked by councils she has agreed to convene, by voices she has agreed to hear. It is not what any single faction wanted. It is what all of them can live inside without burning the rest down to escape it. Jon is the reason it holds, not because he is beloved by every lord who signs the documents. Some of them sign with tight mouths and tighter hands, but because he stands there as proof of something they cannot easily argue against. He is Stark and Targaryen. He is the North's man and the dragon's blood. His very presence makes the alliance legible, makes it feel like something other than defeat for both sides. Catelyn does not attend the negotiations. She is older now, and the long roads have grown less forgiving. She sends Jon with her blessing and Robb's counsel and a letter for Daenerys that she writes 3 times before she is satisfied with it. The letter says nothing about war. It says something about the long work of trust and how it is built in rooms far quieter than throne halls. She is in the Godswood when the raven comes back. It is evening, the light going amber through the weirwood leaves, the red and gold of them burning softly in the last of the sun. She reads the news once, and then she folds the letter and holds it in both hands, and she does not cry, though the feeling in her chest is something enormous and gentle at once. Robb finds her there later, when the dark has deepened enough that the heart tree's face is more shadow than bark. He sits beside her on the cold stone without being asked, because he learned long ago when she needs company and when she needs space, and this is clearly the former. "It held," he says. "It held," she agrees. They sit together for a while without speaking. The Godswood holds its breath the way it always has, that particular stillness that has nothing to do with the absence of sound and everything to do with the sense that something older than words is listening. Catelyn thinks, as she so often does in this place, about a night a long time ago. A room, a cradle, an infant who did not know yet what he cost or what he would mean. She thinks about the anger she carried then, the cold, hard shape of it, the way she'd been so certain she was right to feel it. She was not wrong to grieve. She understands that now. What almost happened was that the grief would have made her cruel, would have calcified into something she passed on to her children and to the boy in the cradle alike. A legacy of bitterness dressed up as principle. She had chosen differently. She does not know, even now, exactly why, only that she had looked at the infant and seen not the evidence of betrayal, but the fact of a life, small and urgent, and entirely without fault in any of it. "I almost didn't," she says quietly, to the Godswood, or to Robb, or to no one in particular. Robb does not ask what she means. He knows the story. He has known it for years, and what it cost her to tell it. "But you did," he says. The weirwood's white branches move in the slow evening wind, leaves turning like whispered words in a language older than the Seven Kingdoms, older than the wars that scarred them, older even than the promises that shaped the lives of men and women long returned to dust. Catelyn Stark sits beneath those branches and watches the last light fade beyond Winterfell's walls. Around her stands a family that should never have survived so much loss, so much war, so many chances to break apart. Yet they endured, not because they were stronger than other families, not because they were luckier, but because when the moment came, they chose one another. Years ago, a frightened infant had been placed beneath her roof, carrying a secret that could have destroyed everything she loved. She could have answered that fear with bitterness. She could have made him a stranger in his own home. Instead, she had chosen mercy. And from that single choice flowed countless others, spreading through years and generations like ripples across still water. The North remembers many things. It remembers honor. It remembers sacrifice. It remembers the names of the dead. But most of all, it remembers the quiet choices that shape the course of lives long before anyone understands their importance. As darkness settles gently over the Godswood and the first stars appear above Winterfell, Catelyn allows herself a small smile. The boy she once feared had become a son. The secret she once dreaded had become a bond, and the love she chose to give had changed the history of Westeros. In the end, that was all any of them could hope for. To choose kindness when cruelty seemed easier, to choose family when fear demanded division, to choose love. And because Catelyn Stark loved Jon Snow, the story of House Stark became something stronger than tragedy. It became a legacy.